Imagine your favorite local sports arena, or maybe a massive concert venue.
Oh, yeah, somewhere you go for a big event.
Right. Picture the sheer scale of it, the architecture, the sheer volume of people. It's designed to hold for those moments of massive civic pride.
Mm-hmm.
Now, just strip away the cheering. Imagine the city goes completely, eerily quiet. And imagine that massive, beloved space being suddenly torn open.
Wow.
Not for a renovation, but to be repurposed as a desperate emergency graveyard.
I mean, it takes an incredibly specific type of disaster to force a city to basically desecrate its own monuments like that.
Exactly.
You're looking at a space built for celebration for community, completely transformed into a monument of just absolute societal collapse.
Yeah.
A place where the sheer volume of the dead overwhelms any capacity for, traditional ritual.
And that is exactly what happened roughly 1,500 years ago in ancient Jerash. It was this stunning Roman-era metropolis in modern-day Jordan. Today, we're taking you on a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of recent ancient DNA research and archaeological papers.
Which completely rewrite our understanding of the Plague of Justinian, by the way.
They really do. Our mission today is to put the historical texts up against the hard molecular evidence. We are investigating a 6th century murder mystery on an almost incomprehensible scale.
Yeah, it's really a massive scale.
And in the process, we're going to see how pandemics aren't just, biological events. They actually weaponize the very things that make our cities great.
Which is terrifying when you think about it.
It is. They expose these hidden human connections, and they freeze moments of terrifying crisis in time.
Right. And to really understand the magnitude of this, we need to look at the site itself. So ancient Jerash, or Gerasa, it was a major hub in the Eastern Mediterranean.
We're talking magnificent colonnaded streets, right? Temples, the whole deal.
Exactly. And a massive stadium called a hippodrome used for chariot races. I mean, in the 3rd century, it housed around 25,000 people.
Wow, okay.
But by the late 6th century, the urban landscape was already sort of shifting. The population had dwindled down to roughly 10,000.
So it was a city already in transition.
Yeah, exactly. Perhaps uniquely vulnerable.
And underneath that magnificent hippodrome is where this investigation really begins, right?
Right. So researchers were excavating 2 underground areas known as chambers W2 and W3.
And I'm guessing they weren't finding chariot gear or gladiatorial equipment down there.
No, not at all. They uncovered a densely layered mass burial of roughly 230 individuals, and they were stacked directly on top of discarded pottery, debris, and rubble.
Oh, wow. Just right on the trash.
Yeah. Now, finding a graveyard in an ancient city is, standard archaeology. But the taphonomic pattern here immediately raised red flags.
Okay, wait, let's break that down for a second. Taphonomic pattern.
Oh, right. So taphonomy is the study of how organisms decay and become preserved. And it tells a very specific story in chambers W2 and W3.
Because usually you'd see something different.
Exactly. When you examine a typical ancient city cemetery, you see a gradual horizontal expansion. Graves are dug sequentially over generations.
Right, like normal city planning, but for a graveyard.
Exactly. You see funerary structuring, bodies laid out facing a certain direction, grave goods, a respect for ritual, and a clear matrix of soil between individual burials.
And the Jerash hippodrome grave lacks all of that.
Completely lacks it. It is what we call a single mortuary event.
Meaning hundreds of people deposited simultaneously.
Deposited within days or maybe weeks.
Well,
the physical evidence shows rapid, high-density deposition. The bodies were commingled.
Meaning all mixed together.
Yeah, as they decayed, bones from different individuals mixed together because they were stacked so closely without individual earth separation.
Right.
They were placed there out of sheer overwhelming necessity. The civic administrators, the grave diggers, the families, the entire infrastructure of death care simply could not keep up with the volume of bodies.
Which perfectly mirrors that modern sports arena analogy we talked about earlier. It is the ultimate architectural indicator of a society just completely overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely.
But I want to look critically at the historical context here, because we know chroniclers from 6th century, like Procopius, they wrote these terrifying accounts of empty cities and millions dead during the reign of Emperor Justinian.
Right, the texts are very dramatic.
Yeah, but looking at the economic records, the plague skeptics, the sort of denialists in the academic community, they actually had a compelling point.
They did. The historiographical debate over the Justinianic Plague has been fierce for decades, actually. Many historians argued the catastrophic accounts were just classic ancient hyperbole.
And you can see why they'd argue that, right? I mean, if half the population of the Byzantine Empire suddenly died, you would expect a total cessation of trade, agriculture collapsing.
The state essentially going bankrupt.
Exactly. But when historians look at surviving papyri from Egypt or Byzantine tax records and land leases from the mid-6th century...
The economy doesn't show that sudden cliff-edge collapse.
Right. Not like what characterized the Black Death in the 1300s. People were still signing contracts, taxes were still being collected.
Yeah, it's wild.
So how do we reconcile text describing apocalyptic mass death with an economy that seemingly just, limped along?
And that paradox is exactly why this physical evidence from Jerash is so incredibly pivotal.
Because it proves it really happened.
Right. Without stark economic disruption in the administrative records, and without confirmed mass graves explicitly tied to the pathogen in the Eastern Mediterranean, skeptics argued the outbreak was likely localized, or just a severe but, normal endemic disease.
Right.
But here's the thing. You can have a highly lethal disease rampage through a vulnerable demographic. The urban poor, transient workers, the elderly, without it necessarily causing an immediate political revolution.
Oh, that makes sense. Or halting the bureaucracy of the elite class who are the ones actually writing the tax records.
Exactly. But to settle that debate, you need the pathogen. You need biological proof that the killer described by Procopius was actually there.
And this interdisciplinary team from the University of South Florida and Florida Atlantic University, they provided the smoking gun.
They did.
But extracting ancient DNA or aDNA from a 1,500-year-old skeleton in the Levant region is notoriously tricky, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. The heat and fluctuating humidity of the Middle East degrade genetic material rapidly. Environmental microbes just swamp the bone.
So how did they get a clean molecular signal of a pathogen after 15 centuries?
They bypassed the bone entirely and looked at the teeth.
Oh, wow. Why teeth?
Human teeth act as unparalleled biological time capsules. The hard, highly mineralized enamel protects the soft dental pulp inside the tooth chamber from environmental degradation and soil bacteria.
Okay, so it's like a tiny natural safe?
Exactly like a safe. When a person dies of a bloodborne pathogen, the bacteria circulating in their bloodstream gets trapped in that dental pulp.
So the researchers just drill into the tooth, extract that preserved pulp, and sequence whatever is inside.
Yep. They use a technique called shotgun sequencing. They extract the heavily fragmented DNA, sometimes just pieces 30 or 40 base pairs long, and bioinformatically map those millions of tiny fragments against known reference genomes.
And what did they find?
Hidden within the human DNA and all of the background environmental noise, they recovered the unmistakable genetic fingerprint of Yersinia pestis.
Yersinia pestis, the exact same bacterium responsible for the Black Death 8 centuries later.
The exact same one. And finding it in the Jerash hippodrome is a monumental landmark for epidemiology.
Because it places it right in the middle of the empire. Right?
Exactly. Prior to this, traces of the Justinianic Plague pathogen had been found thousands of miles away, in small, rural Western European sites like Germany and France.
Which is pretty far from the epicenter.
Right. But Jerash is barely 200 miles from Pelusium, Egypt, which is where the primary historical accounts say the outbreak first made landfall in the Mediterranean.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is the first direct genomic proof of the bacterium right at the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire.
And it effectively silences that denialist debate we were talking about.
Completely.
You have the mass grave, you have the chaotic, desperate taphonomy, and now you have the molecular signature of one of the deadliest pathogens in human history.
It turns a fragmented genetic signal into hard historical truth.
The biological reality of the suffering is now undeniable, regardless of what those Byzantine tax ledgers say.
Well said. But reading the pathogen's DNA only solves the first half of the mystery. The true innovation of this research is that the team used the exact same bioarchaeological techniques to crack open the personal histories of the victims.
Right, because identifying the killer allowed them to pivot and ask, well, who were these 230 people discarded under a stadium?
Exactly. And if you look at the skeletal profiles, they didn't belong to a single elite family, or a specific localized neighborhood, or even a military garrison.
It was a total mix.
A complete cross-section of society. Men, women, teenagers, children. Historically, a trade hub like Jerash would have housed merchants, mercenaries, enslaved people, and local artisans.
So to figure out who actually ended up in the hippodrome, the research team turned to stable isotope analysis.
Yes. Stable isotopes provide essentially a chemical diary of an individual's life. The researchers started with carbon and nitrogen isotopes found in the bone collagen.
Okay, what do those tell us?
Well, nitrogen levels can indicate the amount of protein or marine resources in a diet, while carbon isotopes differentiate between types of plants consumed.
So it's about what they ate.
Right. And the collagen signatures of these victims show they generally ate a typical local diet, what we call C3 resources, which is standard for the Levant region.
Meaning they were living, eating, and participating in the local economy of Jerash in the years leading up to their deaths. But I know bone remodels over time, right? Like your skeleton essentially regenerates itself every decade or so, meaning the bone collagen only gives us a snapshot of the last few years of their lives.
Right, which is why we have to go back to the teeth.
Because tooth enamel forms in early childhood and then chemically locks, it doesn't remodel.
You've got it. The researchers analyzed the oxygen isotopes trapped in that childhood tooth enamel. Oxygen isotopes act like a highly specific geological and climatic signature.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Depending on the local climate, the altitude and the distance from the sea, rainwater has a unique varying ratio of heavy oxygen 18 to light oxygen 16.
Right, because lighter oxygen evaporates more easily from the ocean and drops out of rain clouds differently depending on how far inland or how high up the clouds travel.
Exactly. So when a child drinks local water or eats plants grown in that local soil, that exact isotopic ratio permanently crystallizes into their developing tooth enamel.
Oh, wow. So we aren't just seeing a vague indicator that they traveled. We are reading the exact climate chemistry of where they grew up.
Yes. And the oxygen isotope values among the hippodrome victims displayed an incredibly massive range. It was far wider than what you would ever see in a stable, long-term residential population in the Levant.
Meaning they grew up in vastly diverse childhood water ecologies.
Exactly. And the human ancient DNA testing backed this up definitively.
Tell me about that part.
The researchers sequenced mitochondrial DNA, which traces direct maternal ancestry, and identified specific haplogroups, notably H13 and L3E.
Okay, and where do those haplogroups come from?
Well, these haplogroups reveal that the people in this mass grave had ancestral origins stretching as far away as Central and Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa, specifically regions like modern-day Sudan and Mozambique.
Wait, really? Mozambique?
Yes. People from the depths of Central Europe and the eastern coast of Africa were living, working, and ultimately dying together in a single urban center in Jordan.
That is just mind-blowing. It paints a picture of an ancient city that functioned much like an international airport during a sudden, catastrophic lockdown.
That's a great way to put it.
You have people from all over the known world passing through, trading, migrating, and suddenly the city gates close. They are trapped in one place by an invisible, highly lethal threat. But from an archaeological perspective, why is a mass grave so much more effective at revealing this diverse migration than a standard city cemetery? Like, if Jerash was this cosmopolitan, shouldn't the regular graveyards show the same diversity?
That's a great question. In normal times, migration and its archaeological footprint are gradual. Travelers arrive, they integrate into the economy, they marry locals.
Right, they just become part of the city.
Exactly. When they eventually die, their burials are dispersed over decades or centuries across various family plots or municipal cemeteries. The isotopic and genetic uniqueness of those migrants just gets blended into the background noise of the city's long-term history.
So it's like a slow drip of diversity over hundreds of years.
Exactly. But a pandemic completely subverts that process. It doesn't care about gradual integration. It strikes everyone using the shared city spaces at the exact same time.
The merchant from Sudan, the mercenary from Central Europe, the local artisan.
They are all drinking from the same public water systems, walking the same colonnaded streets, visiting the same markets. The pathogen takes a hidden, highly transient population and freezes them in a single catastrophic snapshot.
The crisis brought them together in death in a high-density pit in a way normal civic life never would have recorded.
Exactly.
It is a haunting realization that pandemics thrive on our connections. The very things that make a city vibrant and economically successful, long-distance trade, travel, dense public spaces, are the exact mechanisms that make it vulnerable to systemic collapse.
Oh, 100%.
And this actually brings us to a compelling companion study the researchers published alongside the Jerash findings, which places this 6th century outbreak into a much wider evolutionary context.
Right, the phylogenetic tree study. So the team analyzed hundreds of ancient and modern Yersinia pestis genomes to construct a family tree of the plague pathogen.
To see how it relates to modern cases.
Exactly. Yeah. They wanted to understand how the bacterium that devastated the Byzantine Empire relates to the strains causing disease today.
Which is really interesting because we have a very specific framework for how we view pandemics today, like the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, for example. That originated from a single spillover event, right?
A virus jumped from an animal host to a human.
And from that single moment, it evolved, mutated, and spread primarily through linear human-to-human transmission. It is one continuous branching family tree tracing back to a single origin point.
Well, the genomic analysis of the plague reveals a completely different evolutionary behavior. The Justinianic Plague in the 6th century, the Black Death in the 14th century, and the modern plague cases we see today, they do not descend from one single, highly successful ancestral strain.
Wait, so the Black Death wasn't just the Justinianic strain waking up and spreading from human to human again?
No, not at all. The genomic data shows these were independent emergence events. The plague erupted repeatedly from long-standing, deep animal reservoirs.
Meaning it was hiding in animals the whole time?
Yes. Yersinia pestis circulates endlessly in rodent populations. Marmots, gerbils, voles deep in the steppes of Eurasia. Driven by climate fluctuations, the pathogen would spill over into human populations, devastate the urban centers, and eventually burn out in those human populations. Then centuries later, a slightly different, genetically distinct strain from that same deep Eurasian animal reservoir would spill over all over again.
That is wild. So if a modern viral pandemic like COVID-19 is a single lightning strike that starts a global forest fire, the bubonic plague operates more like a dormant volcano.
Well, that's a perfect analogy.
It is this ancient, massive reservoir of danger that continuously rumbles beneath the surface, and it erupts in multiple separate waves across entirely different eras of human history, driven by environmental shifts and human encroachment into wild habitats.
And because it operates like a dormant volcano, it is inherently tied to those environmental changes. When trade routes expand into new territories, or when a shifting climate forces wild rodent populations closer to human agriculture, the conditions for an eruption align.
Yeah.
And the sobering reality is that the volcano is still active. The pathogen never went extinct.
Yeah, the sources are very clear that Yersinia pestis is still circulating today. There have been recent reported cases in the American Southwest, specifically in Arizona and California.
Right.
One was a fatal case of pneumonic plague, which is the highly lethal airborne manifestation of the disease. And while human cases are incredibly rare now, thanks to early intervention with modern antibiotics, the bacterium itself hasn't gone anywhere.
No, we have been wrestling with this exact microbe for thousands of years. As a lead researcher on the Jerash project, Dr. Reyes Jiang pointed out, public health measures and containment strategies cannot fully eradicate a disease that maintains a permanent stronghold in wild animal populations.
It just recedes and waits.
The threat simply recedes and waits. Exactly.
You know, the overarching takeaway from this entire stack of research is that pandemics are not just biological footnotes to be debated over tax records. They are profoundly human events.
They really are.
They act as a stress test for a civilization, revealing the hidden migration patterns, the social strata, and the ultimate vulnerabilities of the societies they strike.
Yeah.
The people discarded under that hippodrome in Jerash were not abstract statistics. They were travelers from Mozambique, merchants from Central Europe, local families, everyday people caught in an incomprehensible, terrifying lockdown.
And the research team is already taking these ancient DNA techniques and applying them to the next chapter of this pathogen's history.
Oh, where to next?
They are currently analyzing over 1,200 samples from the Lazaretto Vecchio in Venice, Italy. That island was used as a dedicated, state-mandated quarantine zone during the later waves of the Black Death.
Oh, that's going to be fascinating.
They're looking to understand how the evolution of early public health measures like forced isolation and state quarantine intercepted with the continued genetic mutation of the pathogen.
I am incredibly eager to see the data that comes out of Venice, analyzing how an ancient city desperately tried to wall itself off from a pathogen that we now know is continually spilling over from animal reservoirs. That will provide incredible insight into the origins of modern epidemiology.
Definitely.
It forces you to look at the physical infrastructure of your own world differently.
Every mass crisis leaves an architectural and biological footprint. I mean, the hippodrome in Jerash was built to host the triumphs of a thriving city, and the soil beneath it ended up capturing its darkest, most desperate hours.
Yeah. And when you consider that a 6th century plague forced citizens to desecrate their beloved entertainment stadium to manage an overwhelming tide of mortality, it leaves you with a lingering, provocative thought.
What's that?
1,500 years from now, when archaeologists are using advanced, unimagined technologies to dig through the stratigraphy of the 2020s, what physical traces will they find? When they read the isotopes and the degraded genetic fragments in our remains, what repurposed civic spaces and hidden clues will tell the true, unvarnished human story of our own modern pandemics?
Well, layers we are laying down right now, the environmental signatures we are absorbing, and the ways we alter our cities in response to crisis, those are the exact mysteries they will be decoding tomorrow.
A sobering thought to carry with you. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the silent genetic echoes of the Justinianic Plague. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you.